Bob Kolasky, welcome. You join us as the head of the National Risk Management Center at DHS CISA. On a daily basis, your center is monitoring risks across our nation and the globe. From that perspective, as well as your substantial prior experience, what do you see as the primary drivers of our cybersecurity challenge?
Yeah, so drivers, in Homeland Security, we talk about risk in terms of threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. And when you look at the cyber problem, you can think of drivers from threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. So from the threat side, we've seen nation states, particularly China, Russia, Iran, invest heavily in their ability to cause harm via cyberspace and to advance their own interests via cyber attacks. And unfortunately, with the spate of ransomware, we've also seen criminals move there for economic profitability. So there's a whole element of that driver about how we're going to reduce the threat, which I think we'll probably get into. In terms of vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities have really come not just with the inherent network vulnerabilities that you'll get from underinvestment in IT, old operational technology, but also the connectivity of our systems, so that something that happens, like we saw with Colonial Pipeline, something that happens in an IT network that wasn't underprotected has the potential to make the whole system vulnerable. And so the interconnectivity, the use of technology, the use of some outdated technology has created cyber vulnerabilities as well. So therefore, we're going to have to address that. And then finally, it is on the consequences. And again, returning to Colonial or JBS, the JBS food incident, we see real consequences in terms of real world business and livelihood impacts. People can't work, people can't get gas, people can't get food. That has real world impact. And so we have actors who are going after the threat, taking advantage of inherent vulnerabilities in the systems and causing real world impact. Ergo, we got to up our game.
So given these escalating real world impacts, how do we best up our game, especially those that operate critical infrastructure?
I think we have to start with acknowledging that we live in a period of heightened cybersecurity risk to critical infrastructure. Ransomware events, supply chain attacks demonstrate that. In a heightened period of cybersecurity risk, we really have to focus on the things that are most critical in the nation's interest to protect. That's national critical functions. Those things that the government absolutely needs to work with industry to produce for our economy, for our national security. And with a focus on what is most important, what's most systemically most important, we also have to look at systemic solutions. So when I talk about systemic solutions, it's about more requirements, about better cybersecurity. It's about building cybersecurity to contracts. It's about breaking down barriers to information sharing and public-private partnerships. And it's about leveraging financial levers to incentivize additional cybersecurity.
So how does a strategy for systemic solutions translate to the individual corporation?
There's some process steps. Managing cyber risk has to be part of your overall enterprise risk management approach as a corporation. Cyber risk has to be thought of as a CEO board level concern and it has to be prioritized. Have to put the business investments, make business decisions with cybersecurity in mind, or we're never going to get there. I talk a lot about contracts and suppliers and making sure that as you enter into business relationships, if you think about acquisitions, as you recognize your key suppliers, you're putting things in place to have awareness of whether what you're buying is secure. You're mandating a certain visibility. The old Reaganism. Trust and verify, right? You have to do those around your suppliers and take that stuff seriously. You have to be willing to spend the money in elevating, the risk function, in elevating the information security function, in buying, updating, refreshing technologies in a way that are more secure, in innovating. So a lot of it starts there.
You call for building cybersecurity into contracts.
There's the old terminology of contracting, particularly in the government's often done via cost, performance, and schedule, and that's what you're evaluating contracts against. It's time that you're evaluating contracts against cost, performance, schedule, and security. Because security actually, lack of security in what you've got supplies on actually has a cost to you as an organization. So in terms of ways to get better information about the inherent security of your suppliers, there's a certain element that we need to enhance information sharing in general. The U.S. government, we're trying to get out as best available intelligence, best available testing about equipment, put it in the hands of companies that are making decisions, incentivize companies that are doing business with the government to start at a better security baseline. But there's other ways to enhance information sharing than just relying on intelligence. And businesses do a lot of due diligence. I co-chair a ICT supply chain risk management task force with representatives of the IT and comms industry. And one of our primary focus areas is making some recommendations that will encourage companies to share more information about vulnerabilities of their suppliers, what they know about concerns they may have with their suppliers, with each other, to create an environment so we can all learn from each other. There need to be some perhaps changes in the law to enable that, and that's something that the task force is recommending.
If I remember correctly, there are some parallels in the defense industrial base. Could these be built upon for wider use, potentially in critical infrastructure?
Yeah, and this goes to standards. The defense industrial base through the Department of Defense has embraced the program called CMMC, which is a NIST standard-based cybersecurity maturity evaluation. And so DoD through the tier 1 DIB suppliers, defense industrial base suppliers, all the way down to suppliers of them, has set up a regime to which you can evaluate the maturity of these suppliers against well-established standards that the NIST and others have developed, and that there's a program related to that of auditability and tracking on that and monitoring, so that you get, among the most important things, you have confidence. It's a risk-based program, different tiers depending on the importance of the supplier. I think it's a good concept, and I think what's good about it is it's based on underlying standards that have been proven to work, and then there's a documented methodology to evaluate and make sure that the standards are being followed.
In addition to sharing information on suppliers, you advocate for greater information sharing between both infrastructure owners and the government, as well as amongst the community of infrastructure owners themselves, correct?
My goal is to encourage critical infrastructure owners and operators to have a bias to share rather than being afraid of sharing information. The more that happens, the more information we can get out into the environment. Then on the government side, we got to get better at collecting information. And one of the things that we're looking at options to do is how we deploy more sensors around critical infrastructure in IT and operational technology systems, so we have more visibility around the things that are most critical, and we can suss indicators that adversaries might be looking at attack mechanisms. The theory around cyber information sharing is if something's going on one place, it's likely going on somewhere else. And the more we can knit together better sources of information, the better we'll get at getting that information in the hand of network defenders.
Any other key elements to systemic risk reduction?
There are a lot of things that can be that systemic risk reduction. Some of what I talked about in terms of software and putting us in better position with quality software on the market. We haven't talked a lot about cloud, the shift to the cloud and cloud architecture, and the opportunity to do some zero trust within cloud systems. So much of critical infrastructure depends on cloud, will continue to depend on cloud architecture, and so doing security there. Similarly, around industrial control systems, operational technology. If we can create a market that leaves us in a better place, we get systemic risk reduction, right? Because people are buying the same operational technology across critical infrastructure space. So instead of working one entity at a time, we're really trying to change the underlying technology and quality of what they're buying, and that again starts us at a much higher baseline in terms of cybersecurity.
So we focused in large part on the corporate role so far. Let's discuss the governmental side, including CISA and other related agencies at DHS or elsewhere. What roles do you see government playing in advancing the response to the cyber challenge?
Yeah, what's in our DNA at DHS, particularly the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, is the idea of partnership, public-private partnership, and the government adding value to the risk management efforts. Starts with us being a trusted source of information about risk, a dynamic source of information about how threats are changing, getting it in the hands of security decision makers so that they can make the best security for their business context. But it goes further than that. Sometimes business context still leaves national security risk. And the work we do here at the National Risk Management Center is really to try to get into the delta of where this is what a business is going to do to secure its systems, and this is where we see national security risk, particularly around systemically important critical infrastructure. And when that risk exists, we have tools, we work with other financial levers, we work in other policy changes to have government action to help direct, incentivize closing that risk gap. There's a range of solutions, more information, additional funding, credits against things like insurance and other financial means, making sure that it's part of an overall good enterprise risk approach.
You just mentioned financial levers and incentives. In terms of advancing the rationale to invest in cybersecurity, beyond the basic business value in avoiding or mitigating disruption, do you see government advancing any additional external incentives for greater cybersecurity?
I think definitely. Let me go back to supply and particularly information communications technology software, for example. Through the recent executive order that President Biden signed, we are mandating the development of a critical software list for the federal government, and we are putting requirements on the critical software that we purchase that it meets certain security standards, that it has security transparency. So to do business with the government, the economic incentive is you have to demonstrate that you're meeting standards. Guess what? We buy the same software that other big corporations do. And so it's not like the government has a monopoly in the kind of software we're buying. And so if you're meeting the business requirements of the federal government, that's going to connote and benefit for you able to do and demonstrate more business, get more business writ large. So that's an incentive. I mean, another area where we're really trying to incentivize is around technology innovation, stimulating America's manufacturing base, stimulating the manufacturing base of countries, like-minded countries that were trustworthy, and particularly around 5G, you see a lot of economic movement to make sure that trustworthy componentry can win the competition with less trustworthy componentry that's being subsidized, particularly by China.
Are there additional external incentives that you think are worthwhile advancing, including perhaps in insurance?
Generally, that's a yes. So CISA and the Department of Treasury, Office with the Department of Treasury recently hosted a roundtable with the cyber insurance representatives of the cyber insurance market, cyber reinsurance. And one of the things we talked about there is how insurance incentives can be used as one example to drive higher baselines of cybersecurity. And with the exposure that cyber insurance companies have right now to ransomware, it's time for them to put some demands on customers that if I'm going to insure you against this, I need you to follow the best practices. We're going to publish things on CISA under the banner of stopransomware.gov. Follow those practices, have playbooks in place to get insurance, to get better insurance rates.
Yet insurance rates are largely data-driven, and there's a need to understand the differential in outcomes between prepared versus unprepared firms, right?
What we want to do with the cyber insurance industry is partner to help make more data available to do that more effectively, which goes to your overall question about data and metrics and being able to price all this. I'm a big fan of the idea of cyber statistics being out there. The Cybersecurity Commission pushed the idea of a Bureau of Cyber Statistics. The more aggregate of information we have, the more that economists can put it into models, the more that actuaries can put it in models, that it can be accounted for at board level decision making.
What about the operational role of government during a cyber attack on critical infrastructure and in the immediate aftermath?
There are a couple of different things inherent in the question you just asked. The U.S. government absolutely, us plus other elements of state and local government, should be in the business of changing the calculation of the adversary or the criminal who might do something like ransomware. We need to have active responses to make causing harm in cyberspace less appealing to adversaries. That's government action, right? And there are lots of different strategies around law enforcement or around security deterrence and things like that we're looking at. That's not really my job in CISA to do that, but certainly a whole of government use the tools of law enforcement in strategic deterrence is part of the response. To the actual more incident response piece, that's something we do actively in CISA. We stand ready to support critical infrastructure to state and local governments to help them do the asset response and mitigation after a cyber incident. We have to be asked to do that. Oftentimes, such as with Colonial, the company has the wherewithal, resources, and relationships to engage private entities to do that. In that case, we're still partnering and sharing information, but the capabilities be delivered by the private entities. But writ large, not everyone can afford the private market to do incident response, and we want to help with that, particularly around state and local, tribal, territorial government.
Okay. In closing, what is your message to the C-level leadership and the boards of corporations, especially those that are in critical infrastructure?
At the end of the day, right, you need to hire folks to lead your information security organization that can translate their work into the business terms by which C-level folks, that boards make decisions around that. And so, one level, it's making sure that the CISA job, the chief risk officer job, are folks who can both understand cyber risk and also translate it into business decision-making context. If you sit on a board, I wrote a foreword to the board book, the board handbook for the National Association of Corporate Directors, for example, and trying to talk to them about, how you think about it as a board member, board selection, right? Diversity of board should be folks who can bring cybersecurity expertise and knowledge into the conversations with that. You have to, it's an obligation, right, as an authority over an entity that you put the time in to do the work to understand what good and bad cybersecurity is. And I think that's, well recognized at this point because of the level of accountability that is placed on the highest level of corporations for when something goes wrong from a cyber perspective.
Any additional takeaways for the decision makers in critical infrastructure?
What I'd like people to take away from this conversation is, one, ensure that cybersecurity, increasing cybersecurity, is thought of in terms of a core business practice and a business imperative. We'll get a lot of the way there with critical infrastructure if it's elevated to a risk that is sort of top of a company's risk register. But even with companies taking cybersecurity increasingly serious, there's still opportunity that the government can provide to add value to help the companies do better, leave the country more secure. And that comes to improving the way we share information, setting the conditions for more secure, inherently more secure technology designed, stimulating development of trusted componentry, working at other things that we can do to help stimulate the economic levers that advance cybersecurity. And a lot of what we'll be trying to do in the government is both collect better information, get that information out there, and then identify where the gaps are in risk, take efforts to fill those gaps.